Hello everyone and welcome to the Tank Club. Today we're going to be doing a gear set review of the gear set Saxhleel Champion. And we're going to be taking a look at all the information you need to know about this set. This is still a set that people ask me about a lot. People don't know if it's actually worth using and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to take a look. We're going to see how you can benefit from using this, what sort of things you can do, and if it is even worth using. So let's get straight into it. So we're going to take a look at the set piece bonuses. So we've got the Saxhleel Champion perfected set here. And for the two items we've got 1096 max magicka. Three items we've got minor aegis, reducing damage by enemies by 5%. We've got 1096 max stamina on the 4-piece. 5 items for the perfected version. We've got 1096 max stamina. So extra stamina there if it's the perfected version. For the 5 items, the 5-piece bonus. So when you use an ultimate ability while in combat, you and up to 11 group members within 28 meters of you gain major force for 1 second per 15 ultimate spent, increasing your crit damage done by 20%. So major force is the same buff that you get from using aggressive Warhorn. Now the only difference is, with aggressive Warhorn you also get a boost to your max stats by 10%, so it increases your magicka and your stamina by 10%, and obviously when you use this gear set you don't get that. For this gear set, it's a heavy armor set. This is an important thing that actually makes it really good. So this is one of the reasons why it's a very useful set. It's heavy armor. Now, there are not many good heavy armor sets out there for tanks, especially when you're considering group content. So if you want to use a selfish kind of build, or you're just trying to tank normally, yeah, there's loads of heavy sets. If you're trying to optimize inside group content, the only good heavy armor set that there is right now is Yolnahkrin. But Saxhleel Champion is also a heavy armor set that is now a good set to use for off tanking. So the people who are going to use this set, it's going to be an off tank set for trial content. In terms of 4-man content, it's not that useful, because when you compare it to things like Yolnahkrin, Powerful Assault, Olorim, Drake's Rush, the DPS gain that you'd get from Saxhleel Champion isn't going to be as good, because Saxhleel Champion's relying on you to use an ultimate to benefit from the major force. Now, the only time that would be worth it in 4-man content essentially would be on a Necromancer. When you use a Colossus, you also get the major force with the Colossus, so that would kind of make sense. However, if you're using any other class, Saxhleel Champion just wouldn't be worth it, because you're not going to be getting those almost permanent benefits from the other sets. So sets like Yolnahkrin, that gives an almost permanent benefit. So people are gaining a boost to their stats, a boost to their weapon and spell damage, almost permanently for an entire fight. And it's the same for Olorim, it's the same for Powerful Assault. Using those sets in 4-man content is going to give an almost permanent buff to your group. So it's not going to be worth using Saxhleel Champion in that situation, unless you haven't really got anything else to use. Like, worst case scenario, you could use it if you didn't have other sets, but I would much prefer to use something like Drake's Rush and Olorim, or Yolnahkrin and PA, or PA and Olorim. Just any combination of those sets would be much better for 4-man content, because they're almost permanent buffs. When it comes to trial content, obviously if you use this set in trials, it's going to be most optimal on a Necromancer off tank. Now the reason for this is because for an off tank you might want to use a heavy armor set. So using Saxhleel Champion is obviously going to be your option. Now the big question is, what do you pair it with? So many people ask me, what do we pair it with? Do you use it with Juval's Guidance? Do we use it with Drake's Rush? And the answer to that really is, you're going to just use it. If you're trying to optimize a trial situation, you probably are going to use Saxhleel Champion with Powerful Assault. In an optimized group, that is what you would use. Now, if we consider the fact that, let's say you're a newer tank, your Powerful Assault, maybe you don't have it, or your uptime is really poor because you're not used to using it, you're not very comfortable using it, then obviously you're potentially going to benefit more from using Saxhleel Champion with something like Drake's Rush. So it really depends on your group and you, and what sort of experience level you have. You can definitely use this a lot of like newer groups have really, really poor Warhorn uptimes. By combining Sax Champion into that sort of group, having a higher uptime of Major Force by partnering it with Jorvald's Guidance, by partnering it with Drake's Rush, is going to be advantageous for beginner groups. Now, for more higher tier groups, where they're able to maintain a good Warhorn uptime already, this is just going to add even more damage. So, the way you're going to benefit from getting more damage from this set is by always having somebody use a Warhorn first. So when you start a fight, you don't want to start a fight with the person using Sax Champion, because you're going to lose the max stats, which loses DPS. So when you gain the 10% stamina and magicka by using a Warhorn, that's giving increased DPS. That's a couple of percent of damage right there. So you don't want to lose that. So the way you do it is you use the Warhorn first, because those stats will last for 30 seconds. You go into a fight, aggressive horn, somebody else uses a Colossus, there you go. Good start to a fight. The next person would be the Sax Champion user, because they're able to then drop a Colossus and give Major Force, but you're also not losing the max stats. So that's how you benefit from getting everything without losing anything as well. Now when it comes to more progressive groups, as I said, you might pair this with something like Drake's Rush, so you can get a higher uptime, so you can use it more often. That's obviously quite useful to do. Now, the way you could do it is you could use Sax Champion on any class. It doesn't have to be a Necro. The Necro is the best for using it. However, if you are progressing content, you're in content for the first time, maybe you're going for your first ever trifecta, you might be going for your first ever TikTok Tormentor, you might be in a group where there's 12 people who don't have TikTok Tormentor. Now, something you could do is you could put it on any class with a barrier. Now, that's not something you're going to do if you're trying to optimize a trial, because obviously you want more damage by using a Colossus and getting the Major Force is obviously the most beneficial thing you can do. But we shouldn't shy away from the fact that sometimes you just need to get through the piece of content you're trying to do with a little bit of safety. There is nothing wrong with doing that. There is nothing wrong with using Sax Champion with a barrier, giving your group Major Force and a 35k shield. A 35k damage shield is absolutely crazy. So in those situations, it's worth considering doing that where you might need to. It's not going to be for everyone. It's not going to be for every group. But with some groups, there's nothing wrong with doing that. And I think people need to understand that if you look at some of the really high tier teams, you'll have even seen it in Rockgrove. So teams that have done the Rockgrove trifecta using barriers. There's nothing wrong with using a barrier to get through content and get through it comfortably to make it easier for your group. Especially now when we can combine Sax Champion with a barrier, so you're not losing the Major Force. You're still able to get the Major Force, but you're giving your group a huge amount of safety with a damage shield. It's just incredible to think how much easier content would be. If I think back myself to situations where that would have been useful in some teams where we maybe didn't have super high damage and we could have benefited from having the Major Force and combine that with a barrier, that would have been definitely something I would have done in the past in some of those groups where we were having a difficult time sometimes in the execute phase of a trial when we've had no death. Like, that would have given us that little bit to get us over the line. That would have basically stopped me from having situations where we've had deaths in execute in a trifecta run, for example. We could have done that, and that would have been fantastic. So it's good now for groups that are in that sort of stage again. It's good for beginner groups. It's great for everybody. Sax Champion is a set that should be used in basically every group. Now, there are some situations where you might not use it. So, for example, it depends how you build for Asylum Sanctorium, but I've recently done Immortal Redeemer in Asylum Sanctorium, and I was using War Machine and Powerful Assault. And that's a great setup for that environment. Sax Champion would have also been a great set in that same situation. It's difficult because the Major Force uptime is generally pretty low in Asylum Sanctorium already, but we went with a different buff instead with the War Machine. So you could have used that, and the situations where you might not necessarily need it. So sometimes in Sunspire, this set might not be that useful because the group of damaging the boss, if you've got really high damage in Sunspire, I don't really see how it would be that useful because you're already getting all of the buffs you need. You only really need 3 horns in VSS already if you're really good at burning the bosses. So it wouldn't really work that well. And also some situations like Cloud Rest, I can't really see it being super valuable in Cloud Rest unless you absolutely need a heavy armor set. And the reason for that is because you've got 5 supports. When you've got 5 supports, I don't see the value in having one of the people using a Colossus combined with Major Force. The only time I can see that being useful is if you've got a healer who's a Necro and the Necro off tank, then that could be useful because you could have the healer run the Colossus, you can have the Necro off tank using the Colossus with the Major Force, and then the other 3 supports using a Horn. That would kind of work. But aside from that, if you don't have 2 Necro supports in Cloud Rest, I don't think Sax Champion's worth using because you've got such good uptimes already by having all of those horns and all of that. The only time it might be useful again is a beginner group where you need a bit of safety, or where you've got really poor uptimes, or you spend a long time in the portal and things like that. So you've got to really use this to your advantage depending on what sort of group you're in. Okay, so I'm going to give you a quick demonstration on kind of how Sax Champion works. It's as simple as using your ultimate while in combat and give yourself Major Force along with whatever other benefit you're going to get from using whatever ultimate. So in this situation, I'm going to use Barrier, so I'm going to have a damage shield, and I'm going to have the Major Force. Now, another thing to note is the more ultimate you've got, the higher uptime is going to be on your Major Force. So sometimes you're going to have more ultimate than the ultimate cost. And Sax Champion and the amount of Major Force you get is based upon the amount of ultimate you consume, not the ultimate that you use. So if we look at the set, it does say 1 second per 15 ultimate spent. Now when it says ultimate spent, it means like the total consumed. So if you've got 500 ultimate, you've spent 500 ultimate, it'll give you the uptime based on 500 ultimate. It's not about the ultimate cost, but it's about the actual amount that you spend to use that ultimate. So when we use an ultimate on when we use our ultimate on 500 ultimate, even if it doesn't cost 500 ultimate, you see now. Let's use our barrier. And there we go, 32 seconds of Major Force. Absolutely huge. And look at the size of that damage shield. We've basically got 35k health there, and almost a 35k damage shield alongside it as well. So absolutely insane. So you think now, in the middle of a trial situation, especially in maybe an execute phase or a high damage portion of that fight, this is going to give us a huge amount of safety. If we're there on a Necro, we're going to be able to benefit from that 2-for-1 ultimate kind of Major Force and Colossus. It's great. So this is something you need to think about. And when you work in a rotation, in an ultimate rotation, the way I've started to do an ultimate rotation nowadays is we have like ultimate numbers, ultimate 1, ultimate 2, ultimate 3. So ultimate 1, whenever they go, it's always a Colossus and a Horn. Ultimate 2 is always the person using Sax Champion. Ultimate 3 again is another Horn and a Colossus. And that way we can manage going through that and making sure people are using their ults at a good time and making sure that we've got all our buffs on the group. One of the things to note is obviously when you use your ultimate on a higher value, you're going to get a huge Major Force uptime. But what can also happen there is your Colossus doesn't last as long. Your Colossus doesn't get buffed, so you can end up with that 32 seconds of Major Force, but your Colossus ended, so you still need to run through the next set of ultimates. And also, the Warhorn benefit can be lost as well, because you can lose the stats from the Warhorn. So you do have to try and manage it. Sometimes it's really good, so using your ultimate when you're on a higher value of ultimate to get a bigger Major Force uptime can be good in things like VAS, if you time it really well, so that you're building up your ultimate during the jumps. Obviously you don't use it during the jumps, you wouldn't use it during the heavens, you wouldn't use it during the protectors, but then as soon as everything is available, boom, you use it. You get a huge Major Force uptime, you get to use it for the entire burn phase. Do you know what I mean? There's time into it as well. So if you can time it really well so that you get a bigger uptime, because your ultimate's slotting in at a time where you've got a little bit more than the ultimate cost that you need, you're going to get that higher Major Force, which is really, really good. So there's that to think about as well. Okay, so just to show you again, if we use our ultimate around about the cost of the ultimate, so look, there we are, we're 250, around 250. So we're going to use it. And then we get like 16 seconds of major force, which is good. It's around the same time, around the same amount as a normal Warhorn. So you want to use an ultimate that's around that 200 cost, 2 to 250 cost. So a Colossus fits that, a barrier fits inside that, and then you're going to get your major force that's around the same time as a horn. So it's absolutely fine to do that. Okay guys, so to just recap, Sax Champion, very, very good set. Mainly just for trials. It's great for trials. It's great for off-tanks. Gives you that 2-for-1 benefit, that Colossus with major force, or a barrier with major force, so it either gives you more damage in environments where that's plausible, or in situations where you need more safety. It gives you huge amounts of safety with the barrier and the major force. Great set to use in those situations. You don't want to use it really for 4-man content. There are things that seem to perform a lot better. You do need to be careful. The downside of using Sax Champion, if you don't have people using a horn, is you're losing DPS by not having the aggressive horn stat buff of the Magicka and Stamina like increased by 10% for all your group. So that is a DPS loss, so just be careful of that. Great heavy set, definitely needs to be used by off-tanks. And it works at its best on a Necromancer, but it can be used by other classes. It doesn't have to be a Necromancer, it just performs better on a Necromancer because you can get more damage doing it that way. But still, great set all round. In terms of a rating for this set, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. The reason I don't give it a 5 out of 5 is because it's not kind of as permanent as Yolnahkrin. So Yolnahkrin, for example, is my absolute favourite set. The reason why is because it's extremely easy to manage, extremely easy to use. It's almost permanent. It gives you great stats for your tank. When we look at this set isn't as good because you can't use it everywhere. It's not as good everywhere. It's not as good on every class. It performs well in certain situations. It only really performs well in trials and on off-tanks. So for me, it's not quite as useful because you can't use it in as many areas. But still, it is a very, very useful set. And it's one that you want to have in most trial groups, in most situations. So definitely consider all your options. Definitely take a look and try and understand how the set works and see if it's going to benefit your group. It's going to benefit most groups, or basically all groups. Your top groups are using it, so it's definitely going to appeal to most people. And your bottom groups, your newer groups, your beginner groups, your progressive groups are going to benefit massively from using Sax Champion, using Barrier, and getting Major Force as well. So I hope this video has been useful to people who have questions about this set. If you've got any more questions for me, anything I might have missed, let me know in the comments below and I'll try and answer those for you. Thank you very much for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye bye for now.